my grandpa, I called him Pauper, a man that I very dearly loved, and my family very dearly loved. We held him dear. Very simple-minded man, but yeah, just a loved man. He fought in Vietnam, and the pain that he brought back was both physical and mental. He carried it with him for his entire life, and you should have seen the list of medical conditions that he endured: heart attacks, strokes, all sorts of things from Agent Orange it endured with him. And there came to this I came to this sort of conclusion about my grandpa, that these things that would have killed any other man couldn't kill him, because he had this iron mentality in his head. He was so simple that he could just continue to fight. And we called him the cockroach because he was seemingly invincible. My grandpa was invincible. Um, but that wasn't true, of course. Last year, my grandpa died a painful death, and his invincibility, that logic in my head of this mentality that could get you through anything, was solidly shaken. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video, is suffering. Um, so let's just jump right into it. I mean, how can you approach the subject of suffering? It falls solidly into metaphysics. It's like one of those unanswerable questions. We can only speculate and think about it, and we don't really have anything. As far as when we're talking about God, in relation to God, it's like, what do you do with that concept of suffering? Kate Bowler has sort of an answer. She is a professor of history, Christian history, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. A wife, a mother. This is a quote from her from a TED Talk that she was in. The quote is, a neighbor came to her door and knocked, and she told her husband that everything happens for a reason. She told Kate Bowler's husband. And the husband says, "I'd love to hear it." "Pardon?" says the woman. "I'd love to hear the reason my wife is dying," Kate Bowler's husband said, in that sweet and sour way he has. And Kate Bowler's talking about herself now. "My neighbor wasn't trying to sell my husband a spiritual guarantee, but there was a reason she wanted to fill that silence around why some people die young and others grow old and fussy about their lawns. She wanted some kind of order behind this chaos. Because the opposite of hashtag blessed is leaving a husband and a toddler behind, and people can't quite let themselves say it. Wow, that's awful. There has to be a reason, because without one, we are left as helpless and possibly as unlucky as everyone else." So Kate Bowler is obviously making a claim here, and that's that suffering doesn't really have a reason, at least not one that we can comprehend. And David Bentley Hart agrees, and in premise, from what I've seen of reading in Tsunamis and Theodicy, he seems to agree with this conclusion that suffering can't be rationalized or parceled away, even with the understanding of God, even with our faith in God. Says that suffering has no meaning that we can understand. This is his quote: "We can rejoice that we are saved not through the immanent mechanisms of history and nature, but by grace, that God will not unite all of history's many strands in one great synthesis, but will judge much of history false and damnable, that he will not simply reveal the sublime logic of fallen nature, but will strike off the fetters in which creation languishes, and that rather than showing us how the tears of a small girl suffering in the dark were necessary for the building of the kingdom, he will instead raise her up and wipe away all tears from her eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, nor any more pain, for the former things will have passed away, and he that sits upon the throne will say, Behold, I make all things new." Very beautiful passage, if not concerning in some areas. I do not agree with David Bentley Hart, at least in emotion. If I can justify that logically, well, I'll try my best. Bowler and Hart seem to agree. Suffering cannot be rationalized, not in any comprehensible way, not in any way that we're able to comprehend it. So I've synthesized their arguments into standard form. And this is just my best attempt at putting their argument into this core standard form. It doesn't quite fit within the confines of this, and the logic certainly isn't impeccable. But this is my best attempt. Premise 1. Suffering and grief are inevitable parts of the human experience. Part 2. The existence of suffering and grief can be seen as evidence against the existence of a loving and compassionate God. Conclusion. Since there is no way to reconcile God with suffering, we must simply accept suffering as incomprehensible and rely on our faith. So I'm sure Kate Bowler and Hart wouldn't agree on everything, but they seem to agree on that basic idea. Doesn't seem to be a whole lot of disagreement there. And frankly, I'm disturbed by the simplicity of this idea. That as Hart says, that he will not simply reveal the sublime logic of fallen nature, but he will strike off the fetters in which creation languishes. It seems like a way for, I'm going to adjust the camera, for us to escape from reality, from what the world is, and that God has created something that he loves, even if it is fallen, and that there is indeed perhaps sublime logic in the world. Perhaps not a sublime logic that we can understand. That I will agree with, and I think that is what resounds most strongly in their arguments, that we cannot truly comprehend suffering. We cannot parcel it away. We cannot rationalize it. But to do away with the whole system of sublime logic, I think that's going too far, in my opinion. That's jumping the gun. I believe Soren Kierkegaard says we are finite beings with infinite desires. Our material, our substance, the skin that we inhabit, the cargo of vessels, the cargo of genes that we are, the vessel of genes. It can't comprehend infinite things. It cannot comprehend infinite material. But we want it anyway, and we're struck with the absurd and the paradoxical. And that is part of what can lead us to faith, and that should not be forgotten. It should not be forgotten. We can't rationalize a reason, but we have to search for the reason. I believe that we have to search for the reason. I believe that while C.S. Lewis doesn't in any way disagree with Kate Bowler and, David Bentley Hart on suffering, he certainly offers a different viewpoint. He adds that missing piece that I feel in their argument, that I feel doesn't quite answer everything. So get this. C.S. Lewis says, God has not been trying an experience on my faith or love in order to find out their quality. He knew it already. It was I who didn't. That's profound, because suddenly suffering becomes, of course, something that can't be rationalized. It's something that doesn't have a reason that we can perceive, but it's something that we can reason through, something that can even draw us closer. And I've put his argument into standard form. Premise 1, suffering and grief are inevitable parts of the human experience. Premise 2, the existence of suffering and grief can be seen as evidence against the existence of a loving and compassionate God. We've been through this. Premise 3, this is where the new stuff comes in. Despite premise 2, suffering has the abilities to draw individuals closer to God. Conclusion, therefore, suffering can be a means of drawing us closer to God and transforming us. So C.S. Lewis in no way is saying in this, because he's suffering with the death of his wife. He's experiencing this turmoil. He's understanding that his simple view of suffering in his previous works it's something that was just false. And he comes to a new conclusion, that suffering can draw you closer to God. He doesn't try to rationalize it. I don't think he's trying to rationalize it here. But he takes it a step beyond what Kate Bowler and David Bentley Hart do. He says that we can be drawn closer to God through it. that we can rationalize and try to understand why suffering is there through it. And I think we should rationalize and try to understand. C.S. Lewis makes no claim that we can, but I think we should try anyway. I'm at 10 minutes, a minute beyond the limit, so I'm going to end it here. I could keep going on, but I believe that C.S. Lewis gives a more hopeful view, that we can continue to think about these things without committing some kind of sin or oversight or whatever. I think C.S. Lewis brings hope to the situation, even despite the suffering that he was enduring. So that concludes my TED Talk on suffering. Something I can't even begin to bring justice to. So thank you.